All right, good afternoon for you. It's still morning for me. We're going to talk a little bit today about how we can leverage ISAIEC 62443 to increase maturity cybersecurity of our supply chain. Let me talk about myself first a little bit. That's always important. My name is Sam van Hauwaert. I basically am, let's call it an industrial GRC expert. I specialize in assisting industrial organizations in creating overarching security programs. So I typically try to combine corporate or IT security, let's say ISO 27001, with industrial management systems, as we have the 62443-2-1. And I try to create a single unified approach to security for both IT and OT, which of course doesn't mean we'll be doing the same things all the time, but it means we look at the management from the same point of view. I've basically been doing this for a number of critical infrastructures in Europe, in nuclear and utilities, government organizations, environmental, water and wastewater, and a number of private clients in waste management and manufacturing. Next to my day job, let's call it that, I also try and make some time for the International Society of Automation, where I'm the secretary of the Belgian section. I have done both IT and OT security, so you will see I have a number of ISO certifications, like a 27001, 27005, and 31000, which are risk management, the crisis management, and then some specific certificates like the Chief Information Security Officer, the NIS2 lead implementer, which is a new legislation in Europe, and BCP also has a lead SCADA manager. I'm not sure it was very valuable, but we did the exam anyways. I am, of course, also an ISO certified cybersecurity expert, and I do have some SAN certificate next to that. Today, I will be presenting in the name of KIWA. KIWA is a Dutch-based testing, inspection, certification organization. It's quite large globally. It has over 10,000 auditors globally, which is also present in Asia, mostly under the name BCS. The ISO 62443 series doesn't quite look like it used to look anymore. We're used to this 4x4 square, right? It was general policies, procedures, system, and components, and it was very concise, was very clear. We're looking at policy and procedure mainly oriented at asset owners. System was more oriented at system integrator and asset owner, and the component part was somewhat separate, if you want, where we would be looking at the actual product manufacturer. But as our cybersecurity landscape is changing, it's becoming much more complex. Our threats are constantly changing. Our legislation is constantly changing. We see that standards evolve, and we also see it in the ISO standard. We're now looking at a 6x6 frame. We've included the concept of IoT device as a formal part. We're looking at requirements for service providers, guidance for asset owners. We have something new called security profiles. So the standard is changing a lot. Today, I will only be focusing at the part 2, policies and procedures, because we're going to be looking at this view from an asset owner point of view. So I will be referencing to 62443-2-1, the management system. I will briefly also talk about 2-2. 2-2 is a, for me, a change in the way we approach industrial security. And most part, I will be talking about ISO 62443-2-4, which is a requirement for service providers. Now, what you will see in basically these new versions of the stack, you see we have 2023, 2024, 2025. This is all brand new. It all is just published. And we see that maturity levels is becoming a thing. We've always talked about security levels. We barely ever talked about maturity levels, but that is really becoming a thing. And I think that makes sense. An ISO 27001, an NIST CSF, they've been doing maturity levels for a very long time. And it makes sense to just not only look at the technical part for our security. Now, if we look at what a security program for OT typically looks like, the 62443-2-1 and 2-2, have these security program elements. I think we've all seen them. I think we've all known them, that they're mostly replacing what used to be the CSMS, the Cybersecurity Management System. And they're now more aligned to integrate with other information security standards. The thing that we probably all know and the thing we always talk about is foundational requirements, and typically the combination of foundation requirement with security level targets, for example, where we look at a, for me, very technical point of view. We're looking at users, we're looking at authentication, we're looking at confidentiality, we're looking at firewall and segmentation, incident management. It's a fairly technical approach to security. But security has always been about people, process, and technology. And I think that in OT, we've often forgotten about the whole process and technology part. We are typically, I mean, extremely well versed in getting work instructions very detailed, getting very process oriented. Even on a safety level, we constantly review. We have this way of doing things, but for some reason, in cybersecurity, we were kind of content once we've reached our security level target, and that was the end of it. I think today we will still be looking at security level targets. They make sense. I mean, technology is still the base of everything we do, but I think that today we increase security by getting process security measures, and that is exactly what maturity levels are. And we see this coming back now in 62443 2-1, 2-4. It's always been in 4.4.1, but we see it coming back in the different parts of the standards. Again, this is how, for me, we've typically been doing it. We had an assess phase, we had development, implement phase. We know these things by heart, right? High level risk assessment, zones and conways, details, risk assessment, cybersecurity requirement specification, design the risk out. We know these things. And typically, you know, once the system was commissioned, we kind of let it run and forget about it. I think we often haven't done the maintain phase very well, and we have a lot of reasons why we haven't done the maintain phase very well. I mean, you know, what we do is different from what everybody else does. We have these rigid system that needs to run for 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years. There's a different approach to maintaining, but I think we should still look at it. I think we can no longer just, you know, put a system there and forget about it. The threat landscape changes, the legislation changes, IT around us is changing, which impacts us constantly. So I think we need to focus more on this maintain phase. This maintain phase, I think, is what maturity levels is all about. It's not so much about do I have a firewall? Do I have individual users? Do I have multi-factor authentication? Is my remote access done technically right? This is much more about do I have a process to ensure that it keeps happening? And if we look at maturity levels in 62443, they've done it slightly different than everybody else. CMMI, and I think everybody else, is looking at 5 levels of maturity. 62443 has taken the last 2 levels and combined them into 1. And I probably even think that makes sense, but I think it's important to clarify what maturity levels are. We have a level 1. It's called initial. What does initial mean for me? Initial means that we are doing things. We install a firewall. Some techie somewhere configures that firewall. When we design our system, we are thinking about technical measures, but there's no set of rules. There's no policies. Nothing is set in stone. We just basically ad hoc do what we think is right. And that works for a small organization. But as we grow, we see that we need to create some consistency. And I think that's where CMMI level 2 comes in. The level managed means that we actually know the rules of the game. We have policies written, we have procedures, we have work instructions. We are training our people, we are educating them. We're doing a number of awareness sessions. We have defined our process, all that is there, and it's kind of done, right? they've been communicated, people have been trained, but we don't necessarily have a one-on-one mapping against what we say we will do and what we actually do. I think the next level beyond that is the defined or practiced level. That really means that we abide by the rules of the game. We have policies, we have processes, we have these things in place. We know them, we've been trained on them. And when we actually implement or run our systems, we actually use these policies. That doesn't mean they have to be covered 100%. It does, however, mean that we know which parts are not covered. So we have a list of exceptions. We maintain these exceptions. We review these exceptions. And I think in the next level, the improving level is actually that as we are improving, a larger percentage of our systems are fully aligned with our policies and procedures. We know the exceptions, we review them regularly, and we improve continuously. I think that is what level 4 is about improving.
Hey, Sam, real quick, not to interrupt, but we're not seeing your slides, I hate to say.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. You were on a roll. I didn't want to interrupt, but
I am so sorry. Is that better?
yeah, perfect.
Nice. My apologies. So yes, so actually, I apologize for that. So we were talking about these maturity levels. Probably easier if you see something. Now, before I step into supply chain and into supplier management, which is 62443-2-4, I want to quickly discuss 62443-2-2, which is brand new, right off the press. It continues on earlier concept of security protection ratings. What this basically is in 62443-2-2, we set ourselves as the asset owner a maturity level target. So we basically define that next to technical security measures, we want to be at a certain maturity level. It doesn't make any sense to say that you want to be at maturity level 1 because that's ad hoc. But as we grow, as security level 2 and especially 3 and 4 become a thing, we grow in that maturity. And for every organization, it is important to look at for us, what is the maturity level we require? How do we combine that with security level targets? And what's the ideal point where effectivity and cost become a thing? Where is that point on this axis here for us that makes sense? That doesn't increase cost of our security program exponentially, but that does guarantee us that we do things right and we do it the right way, and we continuously have a process to ensure that it's done the right way. And I think this maturity level thing, this combination of maturity level and security level, which we call security protection rating, is something that we will continue looking at when we do supply chain management. So the security protection rating is basically a combination of security levels with a level of maturity. As you will see in 62443-2-2, we are basically ignoring maturity level 1 and 2. That doesn't mean it's a bad place to be. Maturity level 1 probably doesn't make much sense, but being at maturity level 2 is for me a very good start for a large part of our organization. As we continue doing that, we will grow into maturity level 3 and 4. But don't make the mistake to set yourself the target of maturity level 4, because it's kind of similar of like organizations saying, oh, I need a system security level 3 or 4 without thinking about it just because it sounds good. It's an analysis that needs to be done. What is right for your organization? And it's important to think about effectivity versus cost. What does that mean for us? Me as an asset owner, I will typically always start with the 2-1. 2-1 is my management system. I'm going to define the rules of the game, how I'm going to do it. I'm going to talk about awareness, about training, about getting people on board, about this is how we approach the management system. And typically we've gone from 2-1 straight to a risk assessment, defining a security level target, and implementation, and we were done. That was basically most of the time the cycle. 2-1 management system, risk assessment, target, implementation, end of story. I think today we still have that right side of the column, security level requirements. They will always remain important. But we also have to start looking at maturity. I briefly explained how the 2.2 looks at maturity levels. The 2.4, which is the requirements for service providers, is completely based on maturity level. So I don't believe we can actually define what we need from our suppliers if we don't define what we want to have ourselves. What bugs do we have for ourselves? If we want to be at maturity level 2 or at maturity level 3, it doesn't make sense to choose a supplier that's at maturity level 1. If we want to be at maturity level 2, 3, it might, that's not necessary too, but it might not be necessary to go and look at a service provider that's security level, that's maturity level 4. We need to choose the right maturity level for us again. And as I said a couple of slides ago, it's all based on what is most effective for my company. Not everybody needs to be at maturity level 4. Now, these ISAIEC 62443-2-4, this is where we're going to define process-oriented requirements for our solution providers, for our integration provider, for our maintenance provider. So we are not going to talk here about I need multi-factor authentication. We are not going to talk about I need a firewall. We are not going to talk about segmentation, about monitoring, but we are going to talk about having the processes, the capabilities of doing so. So 62443-2-4, which is, and that's very important to me, it's a certifiable standard. So in a service provider, a maintenance provider can actually go to a third-party auditor and say, can you please certify me against maturity level 3? And they will get a formal certificate reviewed regularly by an auditor saying that they are capable of meeting maturity level 3. There's 12 functional areas here. I mean, solution staffing is talking about personnel, about how we train them. Do we do background checks? Do they get specific training sessions for this job? Who am I going to sign to your project? Is that person capable of doing it? But it also talks about, the same requirements for any third parties they might be using. The functional area assurance, we'll talk about requirements that can provide the necessary confidence that the automation solution is aligned with our asset owners' policies. Architecture is a big one. It's a very big one with a number of subtopics, which obviously talks about the design of automation systems. Wireless is obviously wireless. There's quite a decent part about requirements related to integration of safety internet system in the automation solution. There's configuration management. Of course, there's remote access. I think event management is one that we are often not doing so well, or only doing after there's actually been an incident. But so we look at the capabilities of the supplier to manage event management, account management, of course, antivirus, malware protection, of course, patch management, of course, and backup and restore. So these are our 12 functional areas that we will be looking at in 62443-2-4, and which we will be evaluating the service provider against. Again, we will not be evaluating him about how he implements your specific system. That's still in the security level target, but we will be looking at his process maturity, his ability to do this right. I took one out. So we talked about these two functional areas. For example, under architecture, that's a really big one. You will see that we have a number of topics and subtopics. So certification will happen against each of the 12 functional areas, but will also happen against specific topics that we require. Now, these topics are not mandatory. There's 123 requirements, 72 are base requirements, the rest are requirement extensions. And as a service provider will typically certify against all these security requirements against a specific maturity level, but that doesn't mean that we as an asset owner need all of them. So we need to make sure that we look at the 2.4, we look at what processes are important to us, which are aligned with us, and we'll do that either risk-based, but it can also be based on regulatory compliance. For example, in Europe right now, we have an IS2 directive, which obliges us to verify our suppliers. So regulatory compliance can be one of them. Operational constraints, of course. I mean, we want to make sure that the cost doesn't multiple because we just want to have this fetish about getting a certain maturity level. So that's basically what we will be looking at. We will be looking at a supplier that is certified against a specific process maturity level, but we might not be needing all of them. I have a couple of examples of these because I think the standard is the 62443-2-4 standard is fairly concise in text, but it has a very long list of requirements and requirements extensions for every functional area for every topic. So an example here, when I took the first one, SP0101, it consists of two parts. There's a basic requirement, there's a requirement extension. And this one specifically talks about training your employees. So we want our server provider to only give us people, to only allow people on our system that have been properly trained. So it basically says here, the service provider shall have a process. And I put that in bold. This is not about technical ability, this is about having a process that will only assign personnel that's trained on your system. The requirement extension for this is very much the same, except that now it also includes subcontractors and consultants that they use. I took a second example from the architecture part, SP0308. We're talking about device networking and network architecture. Again, here it says the service provider shall have the capability. Again, it's a process. If he does it or not, that will probably be part of your security level target. That will be probably part of your cybersecurity requirement specification. But we know when we choose this provider, this supplier, that he has that capability. He has the capability of implementing least privilege. And in a higher maturity level, he has that capability to ensure that access controls are role-based. So we will see a list of, what was it, 100 and something of these requirements, where we don't always have requirement extension, but where we basically have a number of processes that we want this supplier to be able to handle, that he is capable of doing. As I said, it's customizable. So we don't need to request everything to every service provider. We need to think about what we need, what subset of these things are important to us. Something which I really love, which I think is very cool, is the concept of profiles. Profiles are a specific subset of requirements that could be adapted to a specific industry sector. So we could create a profile for oil and gas, for example, or we could have a profile for electricity production. So we can have specific profiles where we need this. They can be formally published through IEC, but we can also, if we would want to do that, we could create one with all the energy providers in Belgium or in Europe and just have that as an informal way of managing service providers. Why do I believe this is important? Why do we want to do this? For me, it's easy to, well, it's easier to make sure that you have a predefined provider that has a certain capability. I, for myself, as the asset owner, want my organization to reach maturity level 3, maybe in 1 year, maybe in 2 years, maybe in 5 years. It makes sense to choose a service provider that also has that capability that can help me build that road. It also makes it easier to get your request for quotations out there. I mean, in an RFQ, you can simply put, I need you to be ISO 62443-2-4 certified maturity level 2, maturity level 3, maturity level 4. having an organization that can handle processes, that can handle standard ways of doing things, will reduce your fat and sad time, it will reduce your overall project time. It's also a good baseline. If I know that maturity level 2 or maturity level 3 is what I want to reach, that is my baseline. The fact that it's certifiable by a third party, that for me changes the name of the game. We've been using checklists and Excel files and very long spreadsheets for a very long time to have procurement or ourselves audit our suppliers. The fact that a third-party independent auditor says this company has this maturity level, it simplifies my life a lot. It also removes the burden of having to re-ask these questions every couple of years because the certificate is re-audited constantly. If you are a service provider, there's of course some efforts for you to. Most importantly, you have that recognition, that external recognition that you're doing things right. It's a commercial differentiator, but it also reduces costs in your own organization. As maturity increases, the cost of doing security reduces, and it also helps you get the concept of continuous improvement in your organization. It helps you, it builds you, it helps you to grow your organization constantly, almost organically, almost automatically. It takes effort, but once you get used to working with maturity, it becomes a normal thing that you want to get better. So if you look at the service provider for me, we looked at how the asset owner looks at it. For me, the service provider, he needs to get your management system. Maybe not everything, but all policies, all procedures, all process that are relevant to him is something that needs to be communicated. He needs to know what we expect from him. And of course, from a maturity point of view, and he needs to know what we expect of him from a technical point of view, from a security level point of view. And that will actually help him build a system that achieves our security level, but it can also achieve our security protection rating, which is a combination of security level and maturity level. So for me, getting this information prepared for us helps the service provider in building a system that's not only at a certain security level at one point in time, but that continuously can be maintained and kept at that same security level. Mike, I see you want to interrupt me. I'm just done. So yeah, let's connect. Thank you very much for having me here. I would love to see you guys on LinkedIn. I would love to see you guys wherever you are at expos, at services. So that was my story. I don't know if there's any questions.
Yeah, no, it was good timing, Sam. And it was great presentation. Thanks. I appreciate that. Let's listen in. I did want to make sure, yeah, I popped in the last minute or two in case there were questions. So if anybody wants to throw in a question, I think we have about a minute, but which I know makes it really tight. But I think, like everybody, I thought, yeah, it was a great session. Oh, there's Jigar. And even without the slides, I think
Yeah, I'm very
going
sorry
to
about
say
that.
anything because you were on a roll, and I think a lot of people felt the same way I did. So we were right there with you. So I really appreciate it. So
okay, well, thank you very much for having me, and have fun with the rest of the session.
definitely. All right. Thanks, Sam. Thanks, everybody. And we'll see you in one of the next tracks.